friends, welcome back to Spiritism for All, and today we continue to study the book Behind the Scenes of Obsession. The chapter is the Obsessive Processes, second part. Remembering in the last video, we see the preparation of the visit of the amphitheater, the second visit, where the Spiritist team will try to talk with Dr. Theophrastus. They entered the amphitheater and the show was about to start. So let's go. Tom Silence descended to the amphitheater, a ridiculous master of ceremonies, more similar to old court buffoons, with a hard, hollow face, took a small microphone and began to speak. The hoarse voice was a mockery of a laudatory speech to the figure of Dr. Theophrastus. "He is your justice representative," he said, among other considerations, "in the circles in which we find ourselves. Of course, he doesn't represent all the justice. He is a zealous servant of the life possessions, which cannot be squandered with impunity by the defrauders of the truth." There was a short pause to cause effect over the crowd. The words justice and truth sounded very strangely there. They seemed to be uttered by the sole purpose of creating panic in imprudent minds, picked up by the inner consciousness, which no one really can anesthetize indefinitely. "We are not ruthless as many claim," he continued, with intonations of anger and malice. "We are only the external conscience of those who hide their personal conscience and defraud, avoiding later the settling of accounts that no one will escape from. We don't condemn anyone. We awaken each debtor to self-punishment. We do not violate anyone's freedom, nor do we constrain any spirit to take part in our actions. Everyone we meet here uses the two normal alternatives, sympathy by affinity of tastes, which bring us together in a powerful brotherhood in which some judge and others are judged, in synchrony or by fear, which requires the necessary material to rescue the crimes committed, through the compatible processes that the laws use our possibilities as punishers, that we are made ourselves also spontaneously. That said, we have our hands washed of any guilt, and that we have in the inner assurance that we are not benign with some and severe with others. Each one here receives accordingly to their merits. We have the means to know everything, and we have a legion of informants who monitor those who linger in the body, although linked to our colony, so that, when brought here, whether in physical clothing or not, they can hear the report of the properly trained witnesses about their misfortunes, as if their own conscience decided to speak. Dr. Theophrastus is therefore the whip of the law. Prepare yourselves, unfortunate consciences and hardened hearts. Wait. We have time. We have the miracle of survival. This is what death is. What each one did, how he lived, how he chose to act, bear now the result of your attitudes." Silencing the strange voice, a cruel stillness descended on the room. Even some of the most cynical obsessing spirits showed stupor and fear on their terrified faces. Here, after all, were only outraged consciences, and the vigorous expressions of the truth and justice, though devitalized from their grandiose significance, represented to them the invariable reckoning that no one would shy away from. After a combined signal, Dr. Theophrastus raised a heavy scepter and slapped it violently on the dates that held it. The masters of ceremonies cried out, "Bring up the first case." Digging through the strips of paper he kept in his hands, he detached one and read, "José Marcondes Effendi, 20 years old, domiciled on earth." Two nursing assistants appeared carrying a stretcher on which a deep sleep, a reincarnated spirit, appeared in his spiritual body due to astral projection, which was placed on the surgical table located in the center of the proscenium. We were all watching what was happening. The announcer called again, "Call the witness." From the group surrounded Dr. Theophrastus, a hideous, repellent-looking figure stood out, approaching the patients in restless rest. "You can talk," imposed the sinister presenter of the show. Taking the microphone to make himself heard and clearing his throat disgustingly, the miserable sufferer narrated, "I lived on earth approximately 60 years ago, from where I was expelled through a shameful murder. I was based in Rio de Janeiro, a city from Brazil, in the last days of the Second Empire, being part of the middle bourgeoisie. I believed that I was happy in married life when, at the insistence of my wife, we sought recreation on December vacations in Petropolis, escaping the heat waves of Rio, a habit, in fact, that was repeated every year. Rio de Janeiro is a very hot city in the summer, so Petropolis is a near city of Rio, but it is on the mountains, so it's much the temperature there is lower, so it's not so hot even in the summer. That's why many ones from Rio that had money to have a house in Petropolis used to go there during the December vacations in summer. Continuing, I didn't imagine that my partner of almost 15 years of married life together had been connected to extramarital adventures with one of my employees, who worked in one of the fabric stores I owned. Having no children, at my death all my possessions would fall in the hands of the widow. Embarrassed, if not by emotion but by the sudden rage that gripped him, he paused, which was interrupted by angry encouragement from the galleries. "Proceed, narrate, no fear. We want to know everything." Installed in the mountains near the city of Petropolis, among happy friends who benefited from the excellent climate, I was cruelly murdered without mercy by my wife and her lover, who she ambushed in the privacy of the bedroom 5 days after we arrived there. Soon after, offering an opportunity for the criminal to escape, she staged a theft of jewelry and other valuables, which resulted into the heinous crime. Skilled in the art of dissimulation, she made everyone believe her, and the murder went unpunished. Although an investigation was opened, which sadly dragged on between the competent authorities, without witnesses or new facts to justify suspicions, the case was closed and the grave was silent about the passional tragedy. Unfortunately, in Brazil, it is still very common that many crimes are not solved by police. Unfortunately, if the crimes are not related to very important people, still our century, 21st century, there's nothing much changed about this. Our police is still very incompetent to solve so many crimes that still happen here. But let's proceed. New shock over the desperate crowd. What happened? Shouted in chorus the unbridled voices. Upon awakening on this side, experiencing the cruelties of immortality, dominated by incorrigible hatred, burning with desire for revenge, I returned home. I can't guess with the time that had elapsed, and then my horror had no limit. The traitor, after a regular period of mourning, had consorted with my murderer, both coming into possession of my property, enjoying the result of the ferocious crime. Transfigured by pain and indignation, hovering with the most shocking expressions, the narrator, with a wild look, continued, Despair was devastating to me. I had the impression of dying again. A bestial anguish hurt me, and the pain I felt in my chest, pierced by the stiletto with which my body was destroyed, was added to that of a feeling that burned and kept hurting me, until, mad, I lost track of time, place, everything. I rested in indescribable regions for how many years could I not say it with certainty, without refreshment, without help. A few years ago, I felt a force that pulled me out of the hell I was lingering in, and suddenly I recovered some lucidity. A few years ago, I felt a force that pulled me out of the hell I was lingering in a. Sorry again. The phrase is complex. A few years ago, I felt a force that pulled me out of the hell I was lingering in, and suddenly I recovered some lucidity, discovering myself in front of a young man of approximately 10 years old, for whom I immediately harbored an incomparable horror. Powerful links tied me to the strange youthful body, and linked to the home in which he lived, I began to understand that his body, through a demonic spell that eluded me, concealed the adulteress, now dressed in a new way, as if masked to continue to flee from the sanction she deserved. I totally ignored the coming and return law. Here a note from the spiritual author. The entity refers to the law of reincarnation, in which criminals are forced to go through places once again plagued by their shameful conduct. But I felt that persevering there, sooner or later I would surprise the truth. That's what I did. I started to follow that being who inspired the most shocking revolt. Gradually, I became in tune with him, and I became so constant in efficient inspection that one day, when sleep took him over, I realized that she, his older wife, his wife from the older life, the horrendous murderer, was abandoning his body. Seeing me, she recognized me, and again took refuge in the new flesh, which was shaken by a vigorous shock, producing in him a terrified awakening. I didn't budge anymore. So we can see the reincarnation phenomenon described by a spirit that didn't know it, where his previous wife reincarnated as a man, a little boy, but when she frees from the body through the spiritual astral projection, it's not the boy, it's she, the older wife, and she saw him as a spirit and returned back very fast to the body to protect herself. The unhappy memory mixed with hiccups and moments of lack of control produced a violent crisis in the entity, which continued to be stimulated by the audience, eager for the outcome. Recomposing himself, and after looking at the impassive figure of the chief, he continued, "At the home where he was hiding, I became acquainted with a member of this colony, who also resided there, and I came here brought by him for an interview with Dr. Frastus. At the summons of the magician's name, the listeners in unhinged uproar applauded him with clapping, whistling, and deafening screams. The siren sounded, imposing silence, and the narration continued. Heard carefully by the chief, he recommended me a long-term revenge. He personally went to visit my enemy, and after a lengthy examination, he came to the conclusion that we could produce much in the name of justice for my benefit. The body was young, but the spirit that animated him was that of the assassin, who deserved severe punishment. Identifying in her, in a man's body though, the tendencies kept from the previous life, in which the imbalances reached their peak, the husband, after expropriating her property, fled to Africa, leaving her in the most shocking misery that led her to a bohemian life, annihilating her body in filthy cots of moral perversion, victimized by tuberculosis that she had acquired under a weight of excesses of all nature. It could be easy to disturb her genetic centers through the perversion of the restless mind in deep hypnosis process practiced by the technicians on our side. Stentorian laughter erupted from all sides. "Long live justice!" they screamed. Very well, go forth." In the full maturation of the sexual faculties, under the vigorous assistance of a hypnotist highlighted by Dr. Theophrastus, it was easy to change his interest and incline his libido in the opposite direction to the natural law, since his body was male, producing irreparable dystonia in his emotion centers. From then on, I associated myself with his psychical and psychic organization. Sorry. From then on, I associate myself with his physical and psychic organization, experiencing the sensations that were pleasurable to him, thus creating a conditioning in which our interests now became a commonplace. I was so strongly linked to her life that hatred became a stimulus for enjoyment, leading us into a vampire behavior process in which I became fulfilled and through which I am destroying her, throwing her each time into a more vile pool, until suicide be her only solution. The auditorium was vibrating. The Roman spectacles of the past couldn't be more shocking. It was difficult to know if those were spirits that inhabited human bodies or primitive beings who only experienced the transit of instinct to the dawn of intelligence through human forms. In the pause that became natural, Saturnino visibly moved, commented, "Justice in ourselves. Error always accompanies the disrespectful of the law, as long as he does not self-change to the accept truth and does not spontaneously submit himself to damage reparation. These unfortunate brothers believe that power is in their hands, stubbornly ignoring that the law that grants them the opportunity for such feats does not allow them the reckless use of impiety or the supreme humiliation, consciously forgetting the approach of their own moment in a situation possibly much more painful." He got silent as the narrative amid ovations and scolding proceeded. "After a few years of coexistence between her and me," continued the entity, "I realized that a curious sadness plagued her. She felt overwhelmed by me and began to register my presence. Now, after finishing high school and starting at the university, with a greater understanding of human problems, knowing her intimate drama, she decided to look for a renowned psychoanalyst. Submitted to several tests and specialized sessions, the psychoanalyst, which is docile to my suggestion. I want to clarify that by this time I had already dug into the techniques of suggestion and in the various hypnological processes that I frequently use to carry out my desires, and who totally ignores in his intellectual arrogance the realities of the spiritual side of life, using very fashionable expressions, inspired by me, suggested that the essential goal in life is the person to fulfill himself as he feels better, and that everything else are taboos that must be broken for the sake of the happiness of each one. Pressing the specialist with a skillful suggestion, I managed to get him to encourage her to continue her habitual actions, which was not difficult for me. Fresh laughter erupted, accompanied by the most shocking insulting words of human misery. Much stimulated by the general consensus, the unhappy spirit continued. When I already assumed that I was the absolute owner of the situation, someone advised her to look for seances, as this could well be an obsession. That she looked for a certain preacher of Spiritism in this city who proposed to help her with healing blesses and other resources that I don't know. "What?" cried the auditorium. "How come? And where's the justice? Spiritism is our organization's greatest enemy. Down with the Spiritism. Let's react against their intrusion." Again the hiss of cicadas imposed silence. The narrator continued. Astonished, she started attending some seances, and I suddenly felt unable to dominate her as I had done before. Knowing she had no resistance to what had already become a habit, I began to suggest her from a secure distance. However, instead of receiving my impressions and obey, she began to pray as if she were blessed by strange forces. I then turned to Dr. Theophrastus, who, very wise, gave her specialized assistance and managed to induce her to new misbehavior episodes, forcing her to fall back, which offered me the opportunity to bring her here today. Saturnino Vigilant elucidated. In any disobsession problem, the most important and difficult part belongs to the patient, who after all is the indebted one. He is responsible for the difficult procedure of insistence on good, persevering in duty, and fleeing at any cost to the old cults of the sick self, to the unhappy habits, through which he reconnects with his persecutors who, although momentarily removed, are not convinced of the need to set them free. Prayer, therefore, but also vigilance, as recommended by Jesus. Prayer offers the tonic of resistance, and vigilance the vigor of dignity. Weapons for any situation are the shield and armor of the Christian. My desire is to continue to dominate her, he continued haranguing, and in this sense, our chief proposed to submit her to a surgical intervention, an efficient process against which the Spiritists could do nothing, in the sense of freeing her. At a signal from Dr. Theophrastus, the spirit became silent. The former magician of Juan got up, assisted by two advisors, and examined the entity whose imbalance and vigilance regarding the cult of responsibilities had led her to that painful situation. While that was happening, Saturnino clarified. Let's not doubt about the help from the higher spirits. Jesus is watching. The victim of herself, which our eyes behold, is not at the mercy of such sinister tormentors and completely abandoned. Vigilant entities will come to her aid very soon. Spiritism has antidote for all sorts of minds rooted in evil, as long as those who seek the sovereign and refreshing lymph of restored faith wish to assume with themselves the commitments to persevere in superior duties for personal benefit. Let us pray and trust. We are going to implant, Dr. Theophrastus said in a tone of unforgettable indifference, of a small imprinted photoelectric cell of special material in the patient's memory centers, subtly operating the perispirit, we will make our voice to repeat the same order insistently. You are going to go mad. Suicide yourself. We are obliged to use the most advanced resources as long as they help us to achieve our ends. This is one of the many processes that we can use in our tasks. Frightened, we saw the cruel executioner operating in the cerebral region of the sleeping young woman's perispirit, with several surgical instruments, and although we could not get all the details, the silence in the room denoted the gravity of the moment. After about 10 minutes, the surgery was concluded and the patient was removed. How many questions boiled in my mind! The time, however, did not allow any clarifications. It was a significant moment in the history of our spiritual life, and the stifling, negative environment suffocated us all. Dr. Theophrastus returned to the stand, and a few more cases were treated. Soon after, the show ended. The great crowd of entities began to disband. The loudspeakers declared that from that moment the chief would grant interviews. The time had come. Let us keep serenity and follow our brother Glaucus, said synthetically Saturnino. The benefactor came down from the galleries accompanied by the group and approached the central stage where Dr. Theophrastus was standing. Next chapter, Encounter with the Past. Thank you very much for watching us. If you like this video, please leave us your like, share with your friends, leave us your comments, and helping us to grow. Thank you very much.